if nothing changes in your life, it's not because you're stuck. It's because you're repeating. You're not trapped. You're not lost. And I know part of you wants to believe you are. Because if you're stuck, it means it's not your fault. If you're trapped, it means something outside of you is holding you back. But what if the truth is simpler than that? What if nothing is really stopping you, except the choices you've been quietly repeating every single day? And the scary part is, most people don't even realize they're doing it. Not the big decisions, not the dramatic moments that feel important. The small ones, the invisible ones, the ones that feel normal. Checking your phone instead of starting. Saying, "I'll do it tomorrow," without thinking twice. Staying in places that drain you, just because they're familiar. It doesn't feel like a decision when you're in it. It feels automatic. It feels harmless. But that's exactly how it builds your life. I remember a friend of mine. Every Sunday morning, he would sit in the same coffee shop. Same corner, same seat by the window, same black coffee slowly getting cold beside him. He would open his laptop, scroll for a few minutes, type a sentence, then delete it. Then reach for his phone. Again and again. 2 hours later, he would close the laptop. Nothing done. And every week, he said the same thing. "I feel stuck. I don't know what I'm doing with my life." And for a long time, I believed him, until I started noticing what he couldn't see. There was no big failure, no sudden collapse, just a pattern, the same choices, repeated so consistently. They became his reality, week after week, month after month. And that's when it hit me. He wasn't stuck. He was practicing the same life. You don't stay the same by accident. You stay the same by choice. And if you're honest with yourself for a moment, you might see a version of that in your own life too. Not because you're lazy, not because you're broken, but because no one ever showed you how powerful your daily decisions really are. That's what this is about. Not motivation, not hype, awareness. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. In the next few chapters, we're going to break this open. You'll start to recognize the choices that quietly shape your reality. You'll understand why change feels so far away, and more importantly, how to take control back. Not all at once, not perfectly, but one decision at a time, because you don't need a new life. You need new choices. And if something in this moment feels a little too real, if you're starting to recognize yourself in these patterns, there's someone in your life who needs to hear this too. Someone who feels stuck. Someone who feels like nothing is changing. Send this to them, not because it will fix everything overnight, but because it might help them finally see what's been right in front of them all along. And sometimes, that's where everything begins. Chapter 1. The most dangerous choices. Feel normal. There's a mistake people make when they think about change. They imagine a dramatic moment, a breaking point, a breakthrough, a decision so powerful it flips everything at once. But that's not how most lives are built, and it's not how most lives fall apart either. The truth is quieter than that. The most dangerous choices in your life usually don't feel dangerous. They don't arrive with warning signs. They don't look like destruction. They look ordinary. They look like 5 more minutes in bed. Like one more scroll before you start. Like saying, "I'll do it later," in a tone so casual it barely feels real. That's the twist. The choices that shape your future the most are rarely the loud ones. They're the ones you stop noticing. And once you stop noticing them, you stop questioning them. Once you stop questioning them, you start repeating them. And once you repeat them long enough, they stop feeling like behavior. They start feeling like personality. I want you to sit with that for a second. A lot of people are not trapped in a bad life. They're trapped in a familiar pattern that now feels like life. That's different, and that difference matters. Because a life problem feels huge. A pattern problem can be changed. I remember a guy I used to know from a shared workspace downtown. Every morning, he came in at almost the exact same time, 8:17, not 8:15, not 8:20. Always 8:17. He wore the same kind of blue button-down shirt most days, carried the same scuffed backpack, and set down the same stainless steel tumbler on the right side of his laptop like it was part of a ritual he no longer noticed. He wanted to write a book. Not someday in the vague, dreamy way people say things to sound ambitious. I mean, he really talked about it. He had the title, the structure, notes in 3 different apps, a folder full of voice memos. He spoke about it the way people talk about the version of themselves they still hope to become. And every morning after opening his laptop, he did the same thing. He checked email, then Slack, then headlines, then one video, then another just while eating, then a few minutes adjusting his notes, then organizing the folder where the draft would supposedly live. At 10:43, he'd finally open the document. He would stare at the blinking cursor, maybe type a line, delete it, check his phone, get coffee again. By noon, he looked tired, not from working, from circling. One afternoon, I asked him, half joking, "So when are you actually going to write the book?" He smiled, not offended, almost embarrassed. "I don't know," he said. "I think I'm just stuck." At first, that sounded true. But the more I watched, the more I realized something uncomfortable. He wasn't stuck. He was highly trained. Trained in avoidance. Trained in delay. Trained in choosing motion over progress. That's what most people never see. When you repeat a small decision long enough, you're not just making a choice anymore. You're rehearsing an identity. And rehearsal is powerful. Because your brain doesn't care very much about what inspires you occasionally. It cares about what you practice consistently. That is why knowing better and doing better are often miles apart. You can know the right thing. You can want the right thing. You can even feel guilty every night for not doing the right thing, and still wake up the next day and repeat the same pattern. That's where the real danger is. Not ignorance, familiarity. Because familiarity has a strange power over us. What we do often starts to feel reasonable, even when it's quietly ruining us. The mind would rather protect what feels known than risk what feels necessary. So you tell yourself a story. You say you're tired. You say now isn't the right time. You say you work better under pressure. You say you need more clarity first. You say you'll start once you feel ready. But underneath all of that, something else is happening. You are practicing, not beginning. And the more you practice not beginning, the more natural it feels. Here's a line I want you to remember. The most dangerous choices are the ones that feel like nothing. Because nothing is easy to repeat. Nobody panics over one missed workout, one delayed conversation, one night of mindless scrolling, one morning of hitting snooze, one moment of staying quiet when you should have spoken. That's how the trap works. Life almost never gets wrecked in one spectacular decision. It gets bent slowly by repeated permission. Permission to wait. Permission to avoid. Permission to stay in the version of yourself that asks for change while protecting the habits that prevent it. And here's the part that hits hardest. Most people can feel the gap. They know their current life does not match the life they keep imagining. They know something is off. They know they are capable of more. But instead of studying the pattern, they keep waiting for motivation. That's like standing in a room with the wrong map and blaming your legs for not taking you somewhere better. If you repeated yesterday for 5 more years, would your life change? Or would it simply get older? That question bothers people for a reason. Because deep down, most of us already know the answer. And once you know the answer, your attention has to shift. Stop obsessing over your goals for a moment. Look at your defaults. Look at what you do when nobody is watching. Look at what you reach for when you feel resistance. Look at the tiny moment between intention and action. because that is where your real life is being written. Not in your plans, in your reflexes. A person says they want peace, but they keep feeding chaos. A person says they want confidence, but they keep practicing avoidance. A person says they want a different future, but they keep protecting the routines that created the present. That's not bad luck. That's alignment in the wrong direction. And the reason I'm pushing this so hard is because this is actually good news, even though it doesn't feel good at first. If your life is being shaped by patterns, then your power is closer than you think. You do not need to reinvent your entire existence tonight. You do not need a perfect plan, a new personality, or some cinematic Monday morning transformation. You need to interrupt the pattern once, then again, then again. That's how a different life starts. Not when you feel transformed, but when you stop cooperating with the thing that keeps you the same. The man at the workspace never needed more talent. He didn't need a better idea, a cleaner desk, a productivity app, or another notebook full of intentions. He needed to tell the truth about what he was practicing. Because until you tell the truth about the pattern, you will keep calling it your personality. You will say, "This is just how I am," when really it is only what you have rehearsed the most. So no, you are not stuck because life forgot you. You are not trapped because change is impossible. You are repeating something, that's all. But never say, "That's all," like it's small. Patterns are quiet. Patterns are patient. Patterns do not argue with your dreams. They simply outvote them. And if you remember nothing else from this chapter, remember this. You're not stuck in life. You're stuck in a pattern that feels like life. Break the pattern, and your life begins to move.
Chapter 2. Comfort is not safe. It's addictive. Comfort is not protecting you. It is quietly programming you to stay the same. It doesn't feel dangerous.
That's what makes it dangerous. Comfort feels like relief, like rest, like something you've earned, and sometimes it is. But most of the time, it's something else entirely. It's a loop your brain learns to crave, a loop that keeps you right where you are. Not because you're weak, not because you don't want more, but because comfort feels good now, and growth feels uncomfortable now, and your brain is built to choose now. Let me show you how subtle this gets. A friend of mine once told me he wanted to quit his job, not in an impulsive, emotional way. He had thought about it for months. He felt drained every morning, unmotivated every afternoon, numb by the time he got home. But every time the idea came up, he said the same thing. "I just need a little more time." So he stayed. Another week, another month, another year. Nothing changed on the outside. He still showed up, still did the work, still got paid. From the outside, everything looked stable. But inside, something was slowly shutting down. Less curiosity, less energy, less belief that things could be different. And here's the part that hit me when I watched him. He wasn't choosing the job, he was choosing the feeling of not risking anything. That's the real pull of comfort. It's not about pleasure, it's about avoiding discomfort, avoiding uncertainty, avoiding rejection, avoiding the possibility of failure. And every time you avoid those things, you feel a small sense of relief. That relief becomes a reward. That reward becomes a habit. And that habit becomes your life. That's the mechanism most people never see. Comfort doesn't just keep you safe. It trains you to stay the same. And the more you repeat it, the harder it becomes to break. Because now, you're not just choosing comfort. You're attached to it. Emotionally, neurologically, you start to need it. You start to defend it. You start to build your decisions around it without even realizing it. Here's a question most people avoid asking themselves. What are you protecting? Not what do you want. What are you protecting? Because those are usually two different things. You say you want growth, but are you protecting comfort? You say you want change, but are you protecting familiarity? You say you want a different life, but are you protecting the version of you that doesn't have to risk anything? That tension is where people get stuck. Not because they don't want more, but because they want more without giving up what feels safe. And that trade doesn't exist. At some point, you have to feel uncomfortable. You have to feel uncertain. You have to step into something that doesn't feel like you yet. And most people delay that moment as long as possible. Because comfort whispers something convincing. Stay here. Just for now. You can change later. But later never feels easier. It feels harder. Because now, the pattern is deeper. The habit is stronger. The identity is more fixed. That's the real cost of comfort. It compounds, not in a dramatic way. In a quiet one, you don't notice it day to day. But over time, you become someone who avoids discomfort. And once that becomes part of your identity, everything changes. You stop trying things that challenge you. You stop putting yourself in situations where you might fail. You stop saying yes to opportunities that require growth, not because you made a conscious decision, but because your system has been trained to protect ease. And here's the twist most people don't expect. Comfort isn't the opposite of pain. It's the cause of a different kind of pain. A slower one, a quieter one, the kind where nothing is obviously wrong, but nothing feels right either. You wake up. You go through the motions. You get through the day, and somewhere in the background, there's a voice you keep ignoring, a voice that says, "This isn't it." But you don't act on it, because acting on it would feel uncomfortable. So you stay, and every day you stay. That voice gets a little quieter, until one day it's almost gone. That's not peace, that's resignation. And most people don't realize. That's what they've chosen, not once, but repeatedly. Here's something simple, but hard to accept. You don't lose your potential in one moment. You trade it away, bit by bit, for comfort, for ease, for familiarity. And it always feels justified when you're doing it. That's why it's so hard to see. That's why it's so hard to stop. But once you see it, you have a choice. Not a big one, a small one. In the next moment of discomfort, when you feel resistance, when you feel the urge to avoid, when your brain says, "Not now," that's where everything shifts. Not in the outcome, in the decision. Because every time you move toward discomfort, you break the loop. You interrupt the pattern. You send a different signal to yourself. This is who I'm becoming. And it won't feel natural at first. It won't feel easy. That's the point. Because if it felt comfortable, you'd already be there. So don't wait for it to feel right. Don't wait to feel ready. Pay attention to what feels easy. And question it. Because easy is not always safe. Sometimes, easy is exactly what's keeping you stuck. Chapter 3. Every easy choice is training you to stay weak. Every easy choice feels harmless until you realize it has been shaping who you are becoming. There is a moment that happens to everyone, and most people miss it completely. It is not loud, and it does not announce itself as important, but it shows up quietly in the middle of your day, disguised as something small and forgettable. It is the moment right before you decide, right before you act, right before you either step forward or step back into the version of yourself you already know. And in that moment, your brain does something predictable. It looks for what feels easier, not what is right, not what moves your life forward, just what feels easier right now. Because easy is fast, easy is familiar. Easy does not require you to change. But here is the part most people do not understand. Every time you choose the easier option, you're not just avoiding effort. You're practicing a version of yourself. You are reinforcing a direction. You are telling your mind, in a language it understands better than words, "This is what we do." And the more you repeat that signal, the more automatic it becomes. I remember a conversation with someone who told me something that sounded honest, but incomplete. He said, I just don't feel disciplined. I think some people are built that way and some aren't. At first, it sounded reasonable. It even sounded comforting. Because if discipline is something you either have or do not have, then there is nothing you need to fix. There is nothing you need to confront. But when I looked closer at how he lived, a different picture started to form. He would sit down to work and immediately reach for his phone, telling himself he would just check one thing before starting. He would plan to wake up early, then negotiate with himself in the morning until the plan disappeared. He would talk about what he wanted to build, then spend his time maintaining what already existed. None of those actions looked dramatic. None of them felt like failure. They felt like small adjustments, small delays, small decisions that could not possibly matter that much. But over time, those small decisions created something much bigger. They created a pattern, and that pattern became his identity. That is when it became clear. He was not lacking discipline. He was training the absence of it. There is a difference. And that difference changes everything, because if you are born without something, you are limited by it. But if you are training something, you can also untrain it. That is the twist most people never consider. You are not stuck with the version of yourself you see today. You are the result of what you have been practicing. And practice is something you can change. The problem is that practice does not feel like practice when it is happening. It feels like living. It feels like responding to your mood, your energy, your environment. But underneath all of that, you are repeating behaviors that shape your future. Here is where it gets uncomfortable. You can say you want confidence, but if you keep avoiding situations that challenge you, you're practicing hesitation. You can say you want discipline, but if you keep choosing comfort in small moments, you're practicing inconsistency. You can say you want a different life, but if your daily actions remain the same, you're practicing staying exactly where you are. And practice is powerful, because your brain does not judge what you practice. It just reinforces it. It makes it easier the next time. It makes it faster the next time. It makes it feel more natural the next time. That is why the first time you avoid something feels like a choice, but the 10th time feels like who you are. That is how identity is built. Not through intention, but through repetition. And here is the question most people never ask themselves. If your current habits were a training program, what would they be training you to become? Would they be building focus or distraction? Would they be building courage or avoidance? Would they be building consistency or delay? Because whether you realize it or not, you are in training every single day, not for the life you want, but for the life your choices are preparing you for. That is why waiting for motivation rarely works. Motivation is temporary. Practice is permanent. What you repeat becomes easier, regardless of whether it is good or bad for you. So if you repeat the easy choice often enough, the hard choice starts to feel unnatural. And when the hard choice feels unnatural, you stop making it. And when you stop making it, your life stops moving forward. Not because you cannot move forward, but because you have trained yourself not to. That is the hidden cost of easy decisions. They do not just affect your results. They reshape your identity. They turn potential into hesitation. They turn intention into delay. They turn action into something you keep pushing into the future. And the longer that continues, the more convincing it becomes. You start to believe that this is just who you are. But it is not who you are. It is what you have practiced. And that means it can be changed. Not all at once. Not through a single moment of motivation. But through a different choice, made in the same kind of moment where you used to choose the easier path. That is where the shift begins. Not when everything feels aligned, but when it does not. Not when it feels natural, but when it feels uncomfortable. Because that discomfort is a signal. It is telling you that you are stepping outside of what you have practiced before. And that is exactly where change happens. So the next time you feel that moment, pause. Not for long. Just enough to notice it. Notice the pull. toward what is easy. Notice the quiet voice that says, just this once, and then make a different choice. Not a perfect one, not a dramatic one, just a different one. Because every time you do that, you are no longer reinforcing the old pattern. You are creating a new one. And over time, that new pattern will start to feel just as natural as the old one once did. That is how identity shifts. That is how lives change. Not through intensity, but through direction. And if there is one thing to remember from this chapter, it is this. You are not choosing what feels easy. You are choosing who you become when things are not. Chapter 4. Your environment is quietly deciding who you become. You think you're in control. But your environment has been making your choices long before you notice them. Most people believe their life is shaped by motivation, discipline, or willpower. They think if they just try harder, focus more, or push themselves enough, things will eventually change. And for a while, that belief feels empowering because it puts control back in their hands. But there is something far more powerful than motivation and far more consistent than discipline. It is something so quiet that most people never question it. Your environment. Not just where you live, but what surrounds you. What you see every day, what you hear repeatedly. What you are exposed to without even thinking about it. Because all of those things are shaping your behavior in ways that feel invisible. Let me show you how subtle this really is. I knew someone who struggled for years to stay focused. He tried everything. He read books about productivity, downloaded apps to block distractions, set goals, made plans, and even created strict schedules for himself. And every time, it worked for a few days. Then, everything slipped back. Not dramatically, just gradually. He would sit down to work, open his laptop, and within minutes, something would pull his attention away. A notification, a message, a random thought that led to something else. Before he realized it, an hour was gone. Then another. At the end of the day, he felt the same frustration he had felt before. I don't understand what's wrong with me, he said. I know what I need to do. I just can't stay consistent. At first, it sounded like a discipline problem. But when you looked closer, something else became obvious. His phone was always next to him. His notifications were always on. His workspace was filled with distractions. His environment was designed for interruption. And yet, he expected himself to stay focused inside of it. That's the contradiction most people live in. They try to change their behavior without changing the conditions that shape it. And then they blame themselves when it does not work. Here is the truth that most people resist at first. You don't rise above your environment. You adapt to it, even when you don't want to, even when you think you are stronger than it, because your brain is constantly responding to what is around you. It follows cues, it reacts to signals, it moves toward what is easy and available. And your environment controls all of that. If distraction is always within reach, your focus will always be tested. If comfort is always available, your discipline will always be challenged. If negativity surrounds you, your mindset will slowly shift in that direction. Not instantly, but consistently. That's how it works. Slow, quiet influence. Repeated exposure. Until it feels normal. And once something feels normal, you stop questioning it. That is why two people with the same goals can end up in completely different places. It is not because one is better. It is because one is supported by their environment and the other is working against it every single day. That difference is everything. There is a reason people change when they move to a new city, a new job, or a new circle of people. It is not magic. It is environment. New cues, new expectations, new patterns. And suddenly, behavior that felt difficult before starts to feel natural. That is not coincidence. That is alignment. And once you understand that, something shifts. Because now the question is no longer, why can't I change? The question becomes, what is my environment training me to do? That question is uncomfortable because it removes excuses. It forces you to look at the things you have been ignoring, the distractions you keep close, the habits your space encourages. The people whose behavior becomes your reference point, and it shows you something simple but difficult to accept. You're not just living in your environment. You are being shaped by it, constantly, quietly, whether you like it or not. And here is the twist most people never expect. Your environment does not have to force you to do something to control you. It just has to make certain choices easier than others. That's all it takes. If it is easier to scroll than to focus, you will scroll more often. If it is easier to stay comfortable than to push yourself, you will stay comfortable more often. Not because you are weak, but because you are human. And humans follow the path of least resistance. That is why willpower alone is unreliable. It works when you have energy. It works when you are focused. It works when you feel motivated. But your environment works all the time, even when you are tired, even when you are distracted, even when you are not thinking clearly. That is why it is so powerful. So instead of asking yourself to be stronger, start asking a different question. What needs to change around me so that the right choice becomes easier? Not effortless, but easier. Because when the right choice is easier, you make it more often. And when you make it more often, it becomes your pattern. And when it becomes your pattern, it becomes your identity. That is how real change happens. Not by fighting yourself every day, but by changing the system you live inside. So look at your space. Look at what is within reach. Look at what you are exposed to again and again. Because those things are not neutral, they are shaping you. And if you want a different life, you cannot ignore the environment that is quietly building the one you already have. Because in the end, you are not just choosing your actions. You are choosing the conditions that make those actions inevitable. Chapter 5. You don't get what you want. You get what you tolerate. You say you want a better life, but what you tolerate is quietly deciding what you keep. There is a gap most people never close. A gap between what they say they want and what they are willing to live with every day. And at first, it does not look like a problem. It looks like patience. It looks like being realistic. It looks like just getting through this phase. But over time, that gap starts to widen. Not because life is unfair, but because tolerance is powerful. More powerful than intention, more powerful than desire. Because desire lives in your mind, but tolerance lives in your actions, and your actions always win. I remember someone who used to talk about change constantly. He wanted a different job, a different routine, a different version of himself. He spoke about it with clarity. He knew what he didn't like. He knew what he wanted instead, and yet nothing changed. Weeks passed, then months, and eventually years. From the outside, it looked confusing. Because the awareness was there, the frustration was there, even the motivation showed up sometimes. But the results never followed. Until one day, something became obvious. He was not living based on what he wanted. He was living based on what he was willing to tolerate. The long hours that drained him, the work that did not challenge him, the routine that slowly made him feel smaller. He tolerated all of it, not loudly, quietly, with small justifications. It's not that bad. Other people have it worse. I'll figure it out later. And every time he said those things, he lowered the standard for his own life, not in a dramatic way, in a gradual one. That is how tolerance works. It does not force you to stay. It convinces you to accept. And acceptance, when it becomes a habit, turns into a boundary you stop questioning. Here is the part that most people never realize. Your life is not built around your goals. It is built around your standards. And your standards are revealed by what you allow to continue. Not once. Repeatedly. You say you want respect, but you tolerate being overlooked. You say you want growth, but you tolerate staying in environments that keep you small. You say you want peace, but you tolerate situations that constantly drain you. That contradiction creates tension, and most people deal with that tension by lowering their expectations, not raising their actions. That is the quiet shift that changes everything. You stop expecting more. You start accepting less. And over time, that becomes your normal. Not because it was ever what you wanted, but because it was what you allowed. And here is the uncomfortable truth. What you tolerate does not just stay the same. It expands. If you tolerate something once, it becomes easier to tolerate it again. If you tolerate it again, it becomes part of your environment. If it becomes part of your environment, it becomes part of your identity. And once it becomes part of your identity, it becomes something you defend. That is when change becomes difficult, not because you cannot leave, but because leaving would require you to confront what you have been accepting for too long. That is why people stay in situations they know are not right for them. Not because they do not see the problem, but because they have practiced tolerating it. And practice, over time, feels like truth. So you start to believe things like, this is just how life is. This is as good as it gets. I should be grateful for what I have. And while gratitude is important, it should not become an excuse for staying in something that is slowly breaking you. There is a difference between being patient and being passive, between being realistic and being resigned. And most people blur that line without even noticing it. That is the danger of tolerance. It feels reasonable. It feels mature. It feels like you're handling things well. But underneath that, your life is being shaped in a direction you never consciously chose. Here is the shift that changes everything. Instead of asking yourself what you want, start asking what you are allowing, because that answer will tell you the truth. Not the version you say out loud. The version you are actually living. Look at your daily experiences. Look at what frustrates you, what drains you, what makes you feel stuck. And then ask yourself a simple question: why is this still here? Not in a blaming way, in an honest way. Because whatever the answer is, it will point to something you have been tolerating. And once you see that, you have a choice. Not a big dramatic one, a small, clear one. To stop accepting what you know is not right for you. That does not mean everything changes overnight. It does not mean you walk away from everything at once. It means you stop pretending that what you are tolerating has no effect on your life. Because it does. It shapes your standards, and your standards shape your future. So if there is one thing to take from this chapter, it is this. You do not get the life you dream about. You get the life you accept. And the moment you raise what you refuse to tolerate, your life is forced to rise with it. Chapter 6. Small choices. Don't stay small. They become your life. The choices you ignore today are quietly building the life you will live tomorrow. There is a lie that feels comfortable because it sounds reasonable. It tells you that small things do not matter that much, that one day does not change anything. That one decision will not define your life. And technically, that sounds true. One decision rarely changes everything, but that is exactly why it is dangerous. Because life is not built on one decision. It is built on patterns, and patterns are made of small things repeated long enough to stop feeling small. That is where most people misunderstand how change actually works. They are looking for big moves, big breakthroughs, big moments that will suddenly push their life forward. But while they are waiting for something big, something else is happening quietly in the background. Their small choices are adding up. Not dramatically, but consistently. And consistency always wins over intensity. Let me show you what that looks like in real life. I once knew someone who decided to make a simple change. Nothing extreme. Nothing that would impress anyone. He decided to wake up 30 minutes earlier every day. That was it. No complicated plan. No massive transformation. Just 30 minutes. At first, it did not feel like much. 30 minutes is easy to ignore, easy to underestimate. But he stayed consistent. He used that time to read, to think, to plan his day before the world started pulling at his attention. After a week, nothing really changed. After a month, still nothing obvious. But after a few months, something started to shift. His thinking became clearer. His decisions became sharper. His days felt more intentional. And the difference was not coming from one big change. It was coming from a small choice, repeated long enough to matter. Now compare that to someone else. Same starting point, same potential. But instead of waking up earlier, they stayed in bed, scrolling, delaying, telling themselves they needed the rest. Again, nothing dramatic happened. No immediate consequences, just another day that looked the same. Then another. Then another. And slowly, without realizing it, they built a pattern of delay, a pattern of reacting instead of leading their day. And over time, that pattern became their normal. That is how small choices work. They do not feel powerful in the moment. They feel insignificant. But they are not insignificant. They are cumulative. And cumulative effects are invisible until they are undeniable. That is the twist most people miss. You do not notice the impact of small choices while they are happening. You notice them later, when the results are already there. When the gap between who you are and who you wanted to be becomes too obvious to ignore. And at that point, it feels like something sudden happened. Like you woke up one day and realized your life is not where you wanted it to be. But it was never sudden. It was built slowly. Choice by choice, day by day. Here is a question that might change the way you see your life. If you repeated today for the next year, where would you end up? Not your plans, not your intentions, your actual day, the way you spend your time, the way you respond to discomfort, the way you make decisions when no one is watching, because that is the direction you're moving in, whether you realize it or not. And most people avoid that question because they already know the answer. Not because it is complicated, but because it is clear. And clarity removes excuses. It forces you to confront the fact that your future is not random. It is being built right now, in ways that feel too small to matter, but matter more than anything else. That is why waiting for motivation is a losing strategy. Motivation comes and goes, but your small choices happen every day, whether you feel motivated or not. And those choices are what shape your life. Not the rare moments when you feel inspired, but the consistent moments when you decide what to do next. That is where everything shifts. Not when you change everything at once, but when you change something small and repeat it. Because repetition is what creates momentum. And momentum is what makes change feel real. Without repetition, nothing sticks. Without consistency, nothing compounds. And without compounding, progress feels impossible. That is why people give up too early. They do something good for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, and then stop because they do not see results. But the results were never supposed to show up that quickly. They were building quietly in the background, waiting for consistency to make them visible. That is how everything works. Slow at first, then suddenly. And by the time it feels sudden, it has already been built. That is why your small choices matter more than your big intentions. Because your intentions do not repeat themselves. Your actions do, and your repeated actions become your life. So instead of asking yourself what big change you need to make, ask a different question. What is one small choice you can repeat? Not once, not when you feel like it, but consistently. Because that is where your future is hiding. Not in the dramatic moments, but in the quiet ones. And if there is one thing to remember from this chapter, it is this. Small choices do not stay small. They grow, they build, and eventually they become the life you are living. Chapter 7. Avoiding the decision is the decision. You think you're waiting for the right moment, but waiting is the moment that's shaping your life. There is a kind of delay that feels responsible. It does not look like fear. It does not sound like avoidance. It sounds like patience. I just need more time. I'm not ready yet. I'll decide when things are clearer. And on the surface, those thoughts make sense. They feel careful. They feel thoughtful. They feel like you are protecting your future from a wrong move. But there is something hidden inside that pattern that most people never question. While you are waiting to decide, your life is already moving. Not forward, not backward, but in a direction you did not consciously choose. Because not deciding is still a decision. It is a decision to stay, a decision to continue, a decision to let things remain exactly as they are. And every time you repeat that decision, it becomes stronger. It becomes more comfortable. It becomes harder to interrupt. I remember someone who had been thinking about making a change for a long time. He wanted to leave a situation that no longer felt right for him. It was not dramatic. Nothing was completely broken. Nothing was obviously wrong. But something inside him kept telling him, this is not where you're supposed to stay. And still, he stayed. Not because he did not understand that feeling, but because he kept waiting for certainty. He told himself he needed a clearer plan, a better opportunity, a stronger sense that this was the right move. So he delayed the decision. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. And something interesting started to happen. The discomfort he once felt began to fade. Not because the situation improved, but because he adapted to it. That is the part nobody warns you about. If you stay in something long enough, it stops feeling uncomfortable, not because it is right for you, but because you have adjusted to it. That is how people end up living lives they never intended to live, not through one wrong decision, but through the absence of a decision at all. And here is the twist that changes everything. Avoidance feels neutral. It feels like you are doing nothing, but in reality, you are reinforcing something every time you avoid a choice. You are reinforcing the current direction of your life. You are strengthening the path you are already on. And over time, that path becomes harder to leave. Not because you cannot leave, but because it becomes familiar. And familiarity has a quiet hold on you. It makes the unknown feel risky. It makes change feel unnecessary. It makes staying feel reasonable. That is why people often wake up years later and ask themselves how they got there. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, almost confused way. How did I end up here? The answer is rarely a single moment. It is a series of postponed decisions, a pattern of waiting for the right time that never arrived, a habit of choosing certainty over movement. And the longer that pattern continues, the more convincing it becomes. You start to believe that you are being careful, but what you are really doing is staying still. Here is a question that most people avoid because it is too clear. What decision have you been delaying? Not the one you talk about casually, the one that comes back when things are quiet, the one that makes you uncomfortable when you think about it, because that is the one shaping your life right now. Not the decision you will make someday, the one you are avoiding today. And the more you avoid it, the more power it has over you. Because avoidance creates distance. Distance creates doubt. And doubt makes the decision feel even heavier than it was before. That is why waiting rarely makes things easier. It makes them more complicated, more emotional, more difficult to face. And all the while, your life continues in the same direction. That is the hidden cost of indecision. It feels safe in the moment, but it locks you into a future you never actively chose. And once you see that, something shifts. Because now, waiting does not feel neutral anymore. It feels like a a decision to stay exactly where you are. That realization is uncomfortable. But it is also powerful. Because if avoiding a decision is still a decision, then choosing to act is no longer about being perfect. It is about being intentional. It is about interrupting the pattern, not with certainty, but with movement. Because clarity rarely comes before action. It comes after it. You understand more once you step forward. You see more once you leave where you were. That is how direction is found. Not by waiting for the perfect answer, but by refusing to stay in the question forever. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "I'll decide later," pause for a moment. Ask yourself what that really means, because most of the time, it means you have already decided. You have decided to stay. You have decided to continue. You have decided to let things remain the same. And if that is not the life you want, then something has to change. Not everything, just the decision you keep avoiding. Because in the end, you're not defined by the choices you make once in a while. You're defined by the decisions you stop running from. Chapter 8. The moment you stop lying to yourself. Everything changes the moment you stop pretending you don't already know. There is a point in every person's life where something becomes clear. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a quiet, undeniable way. A moment where you see the truth about your life, and for a second, you cannot hide from it. You see the patterns, you see the choices, you see how everything connects. And in that moment, you understand something that is both simple and uncomfortable. You already know. You know what needs to change. You know what you have been avoiding. You know which habits are holding you back. You know which decisions you have been delaying. The problem has never been a lack of knowledge. The problem has been something else. You have been pretending not to know, not consciously, not in a way that feels dishonest, but in a way that protects you from having to act. Because once you admit that you know, you lose the excuse of confusion. You lose the comfort of saying, "I just need more time to figure it out." And now you are left with something much harder: responsibility. That is the turning point most people avoid, not because they cannot see the truth, but because accepting it changes everything. Because once you accept it, you cannot go back to the version of yourself who was just trying to figure things out. Now you are someone who understands and still has to choose. I remember a moment like that in my own life. Nothing dramatic happened. There was no crisis, no sudden failure, no external pressure forcing a change. It was just a quiet evening. I was sitting alone, thinking about where I was and where I said I wanted to be. And for the first time, I stopped explaining things away. I stopped justifying the delays. I stopped blaming circumstances. I just looked at it directly. And what I saw was simple. My life was not the result of confusion. It was the result of repetition, of choices I had made again and again, even when I knew better. And in that moment, something shifted. Not because I suddenly felt motivated, but because I could not lie to myself anymore. That is the moment that changes everything. Not when you discover something new, but when you stop denying what you already understand. Because denial is subtle. It does not feel like lying. It feels like delaying. It feels like giving yourself more time. It feels like being patient with your own process. But underneath that, there is often something else. Avoidance. Avoidance of discomfort. Avoidance of change. Avoidance of the effort required to become someone different. And as long as that avoidance stays hidden, you can keep repeating the same patterns without fully confronting them. That is why people can stay stuck for years while feeling like they are working on themselves. Because thinking about change is not the same as choosing it. Understanding is not the same as acting. And awareness without honesty becomes another form of delay. That is the twist most people never expect. Self-awareness alone does not change your life. Honesty does. Because honesty removes the distance between what you know and what you do. It forces you to face the gap. And once you see that gap clearly, you have two options. You either act or you accept that you are choosing not to. There is no middle ground anymore. That is why this moment feels intense, because it strips away the illusion of being in progress without actually moving forward. It brings you back to the present, to the decisions you are making right now, to the patterns you are reinforcing today, and it asks you a simple question. Are you going to keep pretending? Or are you going to choose differently? That question does not require a perfect answer. It does not require a complete life overhaul. It requires something much smaller, but much more real. One honest decision. One moment where you stop following the pattern you already recognize. One action that aligns with what you know is true, because that is how change actually begins. Not with a dramatic transformation, but with a refusal to continue lying to yourself in the same way. And once that happens, everything starts to feel different, not easier, but clearer. You see your choices more sharply. You feel the weight of your decisions more directly. You become more aware of when you are slipping back into old patterns. That awareness can feel uncomfortable at first, but it is also what gives you control. Because now you are not moving blindly. You're choosing consciously, intentionally. And over time, those choices start to build something new. A new pattern, a new identity, a new direction. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped resisting what you already knew needed to change. That is the real beginning. Not when everything is figured out, but when the excuses fall away, when the confusion disappears, when the truth becomes too clear to ignore. And if there is one thing to remember from this chapter, it is this. You are not waiting for clarity, you are avoiding responsibility. And the moment you accept that, you stop waiting and you start choosing. You've made it this far, and that matters more than you think. Because most people don't stay long enough to face the truth about their own patterns. They listen, they nod. Then they go back to the same choices. But if you've been here, really listening, then something inside you already feels different. Not because your life has changed yet, but because you see it more clearly now. You've seen how the smallest choices quietly shape everything. How comfort can trap you without making a sound. How repeating what feels easy slowly becomes who you are. How your environment, your tolerance, your habits, and even your delays have been building your current life without asking for permission. And most importantly, you've seen the truth that changes everything. You're not stuck. You're choosing every day in ways that feel small, in moments that seem insignificant. But those moments are not small. They are the foundation of everything. That's the shift. Not waiting for a better life, but realizing that your life is already being created right now. So here's what I want you to do. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Today. Pick one pattern you've recognized in yourself while watching this. Just one. Maybe it's the way you delay things. Maybe it's the way you choose comfort when you know you shouldn't. Maybe it's something you've been tolerating for too long. Don't try to fix everything. That's where people get overwhelmed. Just interrupt one pattern once, then do it again tomorrow, and then again. Because change does not come from intensity. It comes from repetition, from choosing differently in the same kind of moment where you used to stay the same. That's how momentum begins. And once momentum begins, everything starts to feel possible again. Not easy, but real. And if you take anything from this video, let it be this. You don't need a completely new life. You need a different direction in your daily choices. That's it. So take a moment after this ends. Not to think, but to decide. What is one choice you're going to make differently today? Hold on to that. Act on it. Because that's where everything starts. And if this message resonated with you, if something here felt a little too real, then there's someone else in your life who needs to hear this too. Someone who feels stuck. Someone who feels like nothing is changing. Share this video with them, not because it will fix everything overnight, but because it might help them see what they've been avoiding. And sometimes that's the moment that changes everything. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you taking the time to reflect, to listen, and to be honest with yourself. That's not easy, but it's where real change begins. And if you're ready to keep going, to keep building a stronger mindset and a more intentional life, then stay with me. There's more ahead. I'll see you in the next video.